Hello to everyone. This is Karen Hunt with my second ever Break Free Mondays for my paid subscribers. And I do want to thank all of you who have come on board as paid subscribers since I started this. That's really fantastic. Thank you so much for being here with me. And I hope as these Mondays progress that it will get better and better and I will get more professional and everything at doing this. So I'm trying various places to see which is the best like background and everything for me to use. Anyway, I don't have like a professional studio or anything like that. So, but as we go along, it will progress, I am sure. The most important thing is the content, right? So I wanted to, the first Monday, I did a sort of a pretty benign thing, which was sort of a background of how I started Break Free Media, my purpose in doing it, a little bit of some personal stories, but this one is going to be different. I wanted to get right in there and get into some pretty meaty stuff. I've written about this in the past, but I wanted to make this especially available to all of you. There's a lot of heavy research in this piece that I'm presenting to you, and I'll be reading some things as well. So anyway, this is called The Lie of Palestine. And right now we hear there's so much in the media, so many lies going on propagated by Hamas and other Arab nations. So I wanted to sort of dispel those lies in this piece. And Palestine is a fabrication born out of a communist thirst for expansion and an Arab hatred of Jews. This is going back to, I'm talking about right before the Six-Day War in 1967, and I'm going to be getting into that. The desire for Palestine is a veiled expression for the desire to end the existence of Israel. So in a recent interview with Mark Levine, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I quote, "The world has been habituated to the Jew as a victim, perfect victim. During our centuries of wandering, we were massacred, pogromed, expelled, and exiled, and finally burned in the ovens of Auschwitz. So the world got used to us as a perfect victim. Now they have to get used to us as an equal among the nations, and we will not be slaughtered again. And just as they spread lies, we'll spread truth." Now, this is a very, very big, tall order for them. It's a huge process, and there are so many lies out there. So to overcome all of those lies, it's very, very difficult. Ever since Yasser Arafat started the first lie of Palestine before the 1967 war, Hamas took over that propaganda war and has been succeeding very well with it. How to fight against an internet where lies are spread in a matter of seconds to millions of people by influencers, like all these hundreds upon hundreds. I mean, where did they all come from? Out of the blue, all these influencers rose up and started spreading these lies everywhere. I have a lot of people telling me, oh, it's just all on the internet. I've never met anyone who, hates a Jew. Well, you're not going to go around and meet people who hate Jews, not quite yet, but you certainly, you cannot ignore it in the press. Yeah, I mean, in New York, I just wrote the piece about Mamdani winning the Democratic primary, who obviously, you have to be completely blind if you don't recognize his hatred of Jews and his desire for the destruction of Israel. So it is amongst us. It's just very, very hard to admit it. And a lot of people aren't going to come out in a conversation over coffee and say, oh, by the way, I hate Jews. So you're not going to find it as readily in the real world as you would possibly online, where people feel like they can really express how they feel without any consequences. So how to fight against this? And I thought I would address those lies and offer the truth, which is what I've been doing for the past 3 years on Break Free Media. Some of this comes from an essay that I wrote a while ago, which you can read. I have a link to it, and it all started with this lie of Palestine, this very, very clever lie of Yasser Arafat. Arab leaders never believed in a Palestine state. The narrative was manufactured for political and tactical reasons. And I quote from a Dutch newspaper from March 31, 1977. The PLO leader, Zahir Hussein, said, "The Palestinian people do not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality today, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism. The moment we reclaim our right to all of Palestine, we will not wait even a minute to unite Palestine and Jordan." Now you know that Jordan is filled with Palestinians. Even I think the wife of the leader of Palestine, the king, princess, she is also Palestinian, in fact, and they've got a lot of Palestinian refugees. So the idea of Palestine is a very, very made up one. Arab leaders were adamant that Arabs were not Palestinian, and here are two examples. In 1937, a local Arab leader told the Palestine Royal Commission, "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. Our country for centuries was part of Syria." All right, so these are people who consider themselves to be part of Syria. Arab historian Philip Hitti echoed the sentiment shortly before Israel declared independence, saying, "There is no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not." So there was a misconception after World War II when mandatory Palestine was divided between Jews and Arabs. There's this misconception that the Jews got the best land. However, nearly 80% of the historic land of Palestine and the Jewish national home, as defined by the League of Nations, was severed by the British in 1921 and allocated to Transjordan, okay? Transjordan. Jewish settlement there was barred. They were not allowed to settle there. The UN partitioned the remaining 20% of Palestine into two states. With Transjordan's annexation of the West Bank in 1950 and Egypt's occupation of Gaza, Arabs controlled more than 80% of the Mandate territory, while the Jewish state held a bare 17.5% at that time in 1950. If you would like to learn more about the so-called Nakba, I have a link to an enlightening video of Arabs who actually lived through the Nakba, and they give an account of what actually happened. Here are a few examples of those witnesses' testimonies. Here's one person: "Why I left Beer Main in central Israel. It was from the orders of the Jordanian army, who promised that we would return in 2 hours." So an official TV announcement on May 2013, reporter asked another person, "How did you leave Bar Main? Did you experience the Nakba?" And Fawad Qadar answered, someone who actually left at that time, "We left. I mean, the one who made us leave was the Jordanian army, because there were going to be battles and we would be underfoot. They told us, leave, 2 hours, we will liberate it all, and then you'll return. We left only with our clothes. We didn't take anything because we were supposed to return in 2 hours. Why carry anything? Well, we're waiting still for those 2 hours to this day." And of course, there were Arabs who chose to stay, and they were not slaughtered. They became a part of Israel, and that is why Israel is 20% Arab to this day. Here's another official interview of a 2009 refugee from Ain Karim. "The radio stations of the Arab regimes kept repeating to us, 'Get away from the front line. It's a matter of 10 days, or at most 2 weeks, and we'll bring you back to Ain Karim in Jerusalem.' And we said to ourselves, that's a very long time 2 weeks is too much. That's what we thought then. And now 50 years have gone by. Edwin Black, New York Times bestselling and award-winning author, wrote an excellent article about the forgotten history of what sparked the war for Israel's independence. And this is the start of what led to the global jihad. You know, people always say, oh, it's the United States' fault. And yes, the United States has done things that have caused the jihad war to continue and to progress. However, was always there. It's not the result of the United States that we have these problems today. It goes back much further. Well, it actually goes back 1,400 years to Muhammad. But anyway, I mean, what we're talking about today goes back to these events which are described here, and I quote, "In many ways, a turning point was the day Arabs massacred Jews because they dared to sit at what was called, or what's being called, the Wailing Wall while praying. This simple act of prayer was so unacceptable to Arabs that it helped launch a worldwide crisis of hate that provoked a global Islamic jihad, forged an Arab-Nazi alliance during the Holocaust, and still echoes today." So we're going to hear about that right now. The year was 1929. Jewish Palestine was still being settled by torrents of Eastern European refugees. The League of Nations mandate for Palestine included the provision for a Jewish homeland. The Balfour Declaration, widely endorsed by many nations, was a matter of international law. But the Arabs in Palestine refused to coexist with Jews. They absolutely refused in any way except as second-class dhimmis. And you know that means that you have to pay. If you do not submit to Islam, if you do not convert, then you must be a second-class citizen and pay for the privilege basically to still be kept alive. You are just treated any way that they please basically to treat you. Islam had been at war with the Jewish people since its defining inception in 627, when Muhammad exterminated the Jews of Mecca and launched the Islamic conquest that swept north and subsumed Syria, Palestina. And that's another lie that we always hear, is that, well, but, you know, it says in the Quran that, you know, we're brothers and we love one another. No, that's not true. In the context of in the historical context, in the beginning, when Muhammad tried to convert Jews and they refused, he was very, you know, positive towards them. But once that changed, he realized that they were not going to convert, then all hell broke loose against the Jews. For centuries, Jews and Christians in Arab lands were allowed to exist as dhimmis, second-class citizens with limited religious rights. These restrictions were enforced by the Turks, who until World War I ruled the geographically undetermined region known as Palestine, which included Jerusalem. When the Ottoman Empire fell after World War I ended in 1918, the British were obligated by the mandate to maintain the Turkish status quo at the Wailing Wall. And that status quo, according to numerous decrees under Sharia, maintained that Jews could pray at the Wailing Wall, the last remnant of the temple, this last little bit of their temple upon which Al-Aqsa Mosque was built, right? Only quietly. So they could only pray quietly, and they could never sit, even in the heat. Nor were Jews allowed to separate men from women during prayer. The Jews revered the Wailing Wall as their holiest accessible place. This was the only place that they had their connection to their religious history and a direct connection to God. But under Turkish and Arab tradition, the Wailing Wall was not the Jews' holy site. Rather, it was revered by Muslims as Al-Barak, the place where Muhammad tethered his winged steed during his miraculous ascent to heaven. During that miraculous journey, according to Islamic tradition, Muhammad flew through the air on his magnificent horse to the furthest mosque. The furthest mosque was in Jerusalem, they say, hence the Al-Aqsa, meaning the furthest. Therefore, the Wailing Wall became preeminently a Muslim holy place. I mean, they just had to make it a holy place. There is no way ever that any Jewish revered holy place could take precedence over Islamic one. So it was only available for Jewish visitation with permission and under strict guidelines. And actually, if you go there today, you would not believe the strict guidelines against Christians and Jews to go anywhere near the Al Aqsa Mosque to worship and pray. Excuse me. So in 1928, on Yom Kippur, Jews decided to bring benches and chairs. What a terrible thing, right? To sit while they prayed. And they also brought a mechitza, in this case, a flimsy portable partition to separate men from women. This provoked outrage among Arabs, and the British even tried to pull chairs out from under the people to force them to stand. The offense catapulted Al-Hajj Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, to sudden international Islamic importance as Muslims everywhere, from India to London, objected to Jews sitting. So there was a huge outcry around the world that Jews would dare to sit. Husseini even convened an emergency international conference with Muslims in Jerusalem to stop Jews from sitting at the wall to pray. The Mufti and his machinery also they started a non-stop protest movement against perceived Jewish encroachment on the wall. And as the chief religious authority, it was Husseini who directed that the muezzin, that this is the man who calls Muslims to prayer from the minaret, position himself within earshot of the Wailing Wall pavement, and then dial the volume up to rile Jews during prayer and prove Islamic dominance. At the same time, it was Husseini who directed the revival of the cacophonous dhikr ceremony, complete with repetitive shouts of Allah Akbar, as well as loud gongs and cymbals, once again disrupting Jewish prayers with strategic noise. The Mufti also was the one who permitted mules to be herded through the Jewish prayer area, dropping dung and creating a feel and smell of what one Jerusalem newspaper termed a latrine. On August 15th, 1929, when Jews again marked the holiday Tisha B'Av by sitting and also chanted, "The wall is ours," the Arabs began yet another series of bloody massacres. This proved too much for them, that the Jews would chant, "The wall is ours." Just this one wall, okay? The massacres in several cities culminated in unspeakable atrocities at Hebron. So we've heard of this, right? What happened at Hebron. But we don't hear enough about it. We don't hear, the history of what actually happened. This is that history. It began in Jerusalem. Slaughter the Jews, they said. Slaughter the Jews with knives and clubs. The mob attacked every Jew in sight, burned Torah scrolls, and yanked supplication notes to God from the cracks in the wall and set them aflame. Attacks spread throughout the land over the following days. Jews were stabbed, shot, beaten with rocks, maimed, and killed in various Jewish towns and suburbs throughout the area. The chaos continued for days, with thousands of dagger and club-wielding Arabs swarming throughout the city hunting Jews. Wire services transmitted headlines such as "Thousands of peasants invaded Jerusalem and raided all parts of the city." Martial law was declared. Armored cars were brought in from Baghdad. British airplanes swept in to machine gun Arab marauders. Violence continued to spread throughout Palestine. Jews fought back and retaliated with bricks and bars. Okay? Now, remember, Jews are not allowed to fight back. All right? You can see the history over and over again of Jews being massacred in the most brutal, horrific ways up until October 7th. But Jews are never allowed to fight back. As I quoted from Netanyahu at the beginning when I started speaking, with him saying, we have to be victims. Forbid that we should ever stand up and fight for ourselves. This is the history for Jews. Then on August 23rd and 24th, 1929, Hebron became a bloody nightmare. House to house, Arab mobs went bursting into every room looking for hiding Jews. Religious books and scrolls were burned or torn to shreds. The defenseless Jews were variously beheaded. Keep October 7th in mind. Beheaded, castrated, their breasts and fingers sliced off, and in some cases their eyes plucked from their sockets. Infant or adult, man or woman, it mattered not. The carnage went on for hours with the Arab policemen standing down or joining in. Blood ran in streamlets down the narrow stone staircases outside the buildings. House to house, room to room, the savagery was repeated. One young boy named Yosef later wrote of the horror, and I quote what he said: "I remember a brown-skinned Arab with a large mustache breaking through the door. He had a large knife and an axe that he swung through the door jambs until he broke through. He was full of fury, screaming Allah Akbar and Itbach al-Yahud. My grandfather tried to hold my hand. Then he tried to push me aside and hide me, screaming Shema Yisrael, the most solemn Jewish prayer, Shema Israel." Sorry if I pronounce things incorrectly. I apologize. And then I remember another Arab with an axe that he brought down on my grandfather's neck. Not a single victim was simply killed. Each was mutilated and tortured in accordance with their identities, the specific information provided by local Arabs. The Jewish man who lent money to Arabs was sliced open and the IOUs burned in his body. The Jewish baker's head was tied to the stove and then baked. A Jewish scholar who had studied Quranic philosophy for years was seized, his cranium cut open, and his brain extracted. Another man was nailed to a door. Some 67 Jews were brutally murdered at that time. London dispatched special investigative commissions which determined that under the Sharia status quo, Jews were not permitted to sit. Jews were even blamed for provoking the massacres by deliberately sitting. The Mufti of Jerusalem used the wall controversy to continue his campaign against the British and the Jews. As part of that war, the Mufti led a broadly accepted, international, and popularly accepted Arab and Islamic alliance with Nazi Germany. Eventually, when the British tried to arrest him, he fled to Iraq. There, the Mufti and Nazi agents helped inspire the 1941 Fahud, a 2-day spree of killing, looting, and raping the Jews of Baghdad. Once the British finally helped restore order, the Mufti fled again, this time to Germany, where he was taken under the personal auspices of Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. The Mufti formed an 8,000-man-plus Muslim Waffen-SS division, which partnered with the bloodthirsty Ustasha in Croatia to commit the most heinous crimes in the hell that were the Holocaust. The Ustasha wore Jewish eyeballs as necklaces. This alliance with the Nazis spanned every aspect of the war, from intelligence offices in Paris, to plans, to parachute units, to artillery battalions, to a plan to exterminate all Jews in Palestine. This alliance was more than one man, the Mufti of Jerusalem. It was a movement of popular international Islamic fervor that stretched across the Middle East and Europe. So you can see a continuation, a constant continuation of this jihadism and the ways that they express it in the horrific, heinous ways that they kill Jews. After the fall of Hitler, the legacy of hate continued in the post-war expulsions of 1 million Jews from Arab lands. Periodically, the fervor that ignited the massacres of 1929 surfaces even today. Infantadas arise, riots erupt, and the Arab rallied call, spoken and collectively remembered, continues to be in Jerusalem, where Jews should not be permitted, still to this day, to sit at the Wailing Wall when they pray. So now let's take a deeper look at facts from 1948 onwards, okay? So even though 78% of the original British mandate for Palestine was turned into a brand new, never before existed Arab country, Transjordan. It was called Transjordan by the British colonial secretary in 1921. This was before Israel declared its independence in 1948, Israel's leadership twice, in 1937 and 1947, so shortly before declaring independence, agreed to share well over half of the arable land west of the Jordan River, and twice agreed to the creation of the first ever independent state west of the Jordan River. So already at that time, Israel was doing its best to make peace, to create a two-state solution. The Arab side to the conflict, led by an undisputed Nazi collaborator and virulent anti-Semite Haj Amin al-Husseini, rejected both of these offers in favor of war. And but for those wars, there would have been no refugees or casualties. So it is the wars, please understand, the war, the Nakba that they call, that started this whole refugee crisis. The war because they refused peace. They refused over and over again peace. They preferred war. Notably, when the 1937 and 1947 offers to create two separate independent states in British-controlled Palestine were rejected by the Arab Higher Committee, those offers were to create an independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state, and not, remember, so there was never anything talk about a Palestinian state, never. It was an independent Arab state and an independent Jewish state. So after Israel declared its independence in 1948, Arab dictatorships throughout the MENA forced nearly 900,000 Jews, almost 1 million Jews, from their homes, and almost all those Jewish refugees found refuge in Israel. From 1948 to 1967, before there was any occupied territory, remember, I mean, during that time, Israel didn't occupy anything, all right? It was separate. No one ever tried. So Jordan, Syria, Egypt, none of these places ever tried to create a Palestinian Arab state, either in Gaza or in Judea or Samaria, which is what Transjordan decided then to call the West Bank in 1950. Even though both areas were completely controlled by Arab countries, all right? And during this time, nearly 1,000 Israeli civilians were murdered in terrorist attacks during this time. The Palestinian Authority in 2000, 2001, and 2008, without ever making a counter-offer, 3 times rejected offers that would have created a first ever Palestinian Arab state in over 90% of the West Bank and Gaza. And in 2001, they launched a brutal bombing campaign. It was called the Second Intifada, that murdered over 1,000 Jews and maimed another 8,000 in barely more than 4 years. The Palestinian Authority's corrupt dictator, Mahmoud Abbas, who is there to this day, who built himself, by the way, a $13 million home and is in the 19th, at least from when this was written, which I'm quoting from, the 19th year of his original 4-year term. So he's just remained there as a tyrannical leader all of this time. He funds a virtual pay-to-slay program that incentivized Palestinian Arabs to murder Jews by paying those who murder Jews nearly 8 times the average salary earned by a high school teacher working for the PA. So these people are rewarded handsomely. Kill a Jew, you get a lot of money for it. And this has been going on for a long time. This has apparently stopped now. But understand that, this whole idea that the PA and Abbas would rule, I mean, he's hated by everyone. There's no way that that's ever going to work. That is just a made-up fantasy land story for Westerners. It's just never, ever going to happen. Both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas promote incredible anti-Semitic propaganda that demonizes Jews, not just Israelis, mind you, but all Jews, and completely denies. So they completely deny the historical, cultural, archaeological, and religious connection that Jews have to the land of Israel. And you can see how those lies have been spread now across the internet with this revisionist history, which is just absolutely incredibly wrong. And they all are promoting like Nazi-like stereotypes of Jews, which we see now. Jews rule the world, all this kind of stuff, really demonizing Jews horrifically. We see it all over the place now. The Hamas charter, for example, has blamed Jews for causing every single conflict from the French Revolution through World War II, demonizing Jews and making it easier for people to justify mass murdering Jews like the Nazis did. So overall, the 1967-68 war, and I said many times that, yes, I was there, 10, almost 11 years old. It was right before my birthday that my family was there, so we saw it all. I remember it all. I remember it was terrifying to be there at that time when the people, Egyptians were rising up with so much hatred towards the United States and towards Israel, and we had to get out of there. So this was, Israel miraculously won that war against all the Arab nations, again, that came against it. It's miraculous, the wars that Israel has won. Certainly starting with the first war, when a band of ragged, Jews stood up against all these armies that were against them, and they still won. So this was the magical moment, 1967, when Palestine was sort of created out of thin air. And we have the words of the author. This is great, Walid Shubat of Bethlehem. He summed it up profoundly when he said, "On June 4th, 1967, I was a Jordanian, and overnight I became a Palestinian." And I was there. So June 6th is my birthday, so we escaped out into Turkey, and I celebrated my 11th birthday in Ankara, Turkey, as we had gotten out of Egypt, out of Lebanon, and then Syria. So in 1964, propaganda genius Arafat, and this is really interesting, and master manipulators of the KGB, they sort of joined forces and decided that Arabs should start calling themselves Palestinians. But only temporarily, mind you. This was never intended to be a lasting thing until they destroyed and occupied Israel, because they just kept thinking over and over, oh, it's not going to be a problem. We can easily destroy these Jews. We'll just go in there, destroy them, we'll take over everything. And then, we'll be an Arab nation, basically. The purpose of this identity theft was to create the impression that it was Jews that had stolen the land from Arabs. Psychologically, this turned the Palestinians into the oppressed. Okay, so there was this huge shift because of this narrative that the Palestinians became the oppressed, and being oppressed was a big trend in the West. And Arafat knew how to use those trends, and he was very, very clever with all of this. In the Stanford Review, detailed the fabrication of Palestine and Soviet involvement in the deception of Palestinian nationalism, and I quote from that paper, "The blueprint for the PLO charter was drafted in Moscow in 1964 and was approved by 422 Palestinian representatives hand-selected by the KGB. At that time, the USSR was in the business of creating People's Liberation Fronts. The KGB founded the PLO, as well as the National Liberation Army of Bolivia in 1964, with Ernesto Che Guevara at its head, and the National Liberation Army of Colombia in 1965. They were very busy, as the United States was very busy in Central and South America too. From the deception of Palestinian nationalism, I quote, "To understand the PLO's conception of a Palestinian state, it is instructive to examine Article 24 of the original PLO charter. It reads, this organization, the PLO, does not exercise any regional sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, in the Gaza Strip, or the Hema area. If not the West Bank and Gaza, then what did the PLO claim? The Palestine that the PLO wanted was, in fact, it wasn't this area. They did not want a separate state. What they wanted was the state of Israel. Consider that it was not until 1968 that Article 24 was amended to include a claim on the West Bank and Gaza. At the time of the original drafting, Jordan and Egypt controlled the West Bank and Gaza. after unilaterally and illegally annexing them following the War of Israeli Independence in 1948. It was only after Israel had gained these territories in the war, 1967, in that war, Israel gained quite a lot of territory, that the Palestinian Arabs declared an interest in controlling them. Suddenly, now that Israel had them, they didn't care before. But as soon as Israel got control of these areas in a war, then suddenly they were interested in it. The evidence that simple autonomy in the West Bank and Gaza was never the PLO's true goal is everywhere. In 1970, U.S. Secretary of State William Rogers suggested that the West Bank and Gaza be given up by Israel in return for peace and recognition. This plan was accepted by Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. Only Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO, rejected it, opting instead to attempt an overthrow of Jordan's King Hussein. The evidence runs deeper. Yasser Arafat, who was head of the PLO until 2004, was under the direct tutelage and control of the KGB. Ayam Mihai Pasepa, KGB officer and one-time chief of Romanian intelligence, was assigned to handling Arafat. Pasepa recorded several of his conversations with Arafat when they met in Romania at the palace of brutal dictators Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu. In these conversations, Arafat unequivocally states that his sole aim is to destroy Israel. Pasepa and the KGB were delighted. They consulted General Giap, a close associate of Ho Chi Minh, who was involved with the North Vietnamese propaganda effort during the Vietnam War, and Giap recommended to Arafat that he stop talking about annihilating Israel. Stop using that kind of language. Instead, turn your terror war into a struggle for human rights. It had worked in Vietnam, he claimed, because transforming the conflict from one of ideologies, socialism versus capitalism, to one of an indigenous people's struggle for liberty. So it's not sort of an ideology, but you're thinking about, you're giving sort of some empathy to these people, to the indigenous people struggle for liberty, and that had turned into a popular movement. And, we had, you could see it all over protests, as we see now, how they were easily able to get the young people in the United States across Europe to start protesting in the same kind of manner today. I have to get a little drink of water here. And similar advice was provided to Arafat by Mohammed Yazid, Minister of Information, in two Algerian wartime governments. And this is what he wrote. Wipe out the argument that Israel is a small state whose existence is threatened by the Arab states. Listen to that again. Wipe out the argument that Israel is a small state. We could look at Israel on the map. That's exactly what it is. But you cannot, people don't even see that concept anymore. They don't see the reality of what Israel faces. So wipe out that concept. Wipe out the impression that in the struggle between the Palestinians and Zionists, the Zionist is the underdog. Now it is the Arab who is oppressed and victimized in his existence because he is not only facing the Zionists, but also world imperialism. So this whole, the colonization of the world by the evil West, Western empires. And this succeeded very well. So he listened, Arafat listened to this advice, and he began to portray the Palestinian Arabs as a supposedly indigenous population, which they absolutely were not, whose human rights were being tarnished by Israel. The fact is that after the War of 1967, Israel inherited Arab refugees living in the West Bank and Gaza that were forced to live there in the period of Egyptian and Jordanian control from 1948 to 1967. Israel immediately offered to return the lands it won in 1967. That would be West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights, in return for a peace treaty. And guess what? It was rejected by the Arab countries in the Khartoum Conference, August 29th to September 1st, 1967. In Arafat's authorized biography, Arafat, Terrorist or Peacemaker, Arafat claims this moment was one of his greatest diplomatic victories. Palestinian nationalism is therefore a historical fabrication born out of a communist thirst for expansion and an Arab resentment and hatred of Jews and for the existence of Israel. The need and desire for Palestine, it is a veiled expression of the need and desire to exterminate Israel's existence. All of this does not exclude the fact that there are, yes, very real people living in Gaza and the West Bank who suffer because of these manipulations. But it is time for the Western world to admit that they have fallen for a lie and that Palestinian is the most famous identity theft in history. So here we are now, and Israel has won again. I mean, Israel has won this war in Gaza, but they refuse to submit. They refuse to accept defeat. Israel has no choice. I mean, this whole propaganda war, I don't think, Netanyahu has said he wants to sort of fight against this propaganda war and tell the truth. But you cannot fight. I don't think that he will ever win in the propaganda war. Israel must do what it needs to do. It must stop caring what the rest of the world thinks. And there are, I'm sure, some people who are going to really not like me saying this. But, this is what I think. Come back, give me your opinion. Let me know what you think. I'm very happy to, consider it. But, Israel needs to understand, no matter what they do by this point, the world is never going to be satisfied. Until Israel returns, I have to plug in my computer. Until Israel returns to its victim status and allows themselves, Jews allow themselves to be killed again. Nobody's going, the world does not accept them with this kind of strength, with this kind of power. I mean, if the shoe was on the other foot, what if the Palestinians just overran Israel and just started killing everybody? Would Jews become the victims then? I mean, would everybody start feeling sorry for the Jews? When you win a battle, yeah, nobody feels sorry for you, but it's a battle that they are constantly having to fight because they are constantly being attacked. They don't ask for these battles. They have basically no choice but to fight back. And every time that they win, the more that they win, the more that they are hated. And as I quoted Netanyahu in the beginning, as I said, nobody's going to accept Jews as being strong. They only want them to be weak. But as they show, they are not weak any longer. So I hope that Israel has learned its lesson by now. I mean, every war, they gain territory, they give it back again. They try to make peace. They do ceasefires. Well, their enemy is never, ever going to cease fire. They're never going to cease fire. They say it all the time. Their goal is to destroy, annihilate, kill every Jew. It's in the heart of Islam. It's what they say over and over again. It's not a mystery. Masab Hassan Yosef said the truth in a recent interview. I listened to a recent interview of his. He's so powerful. And I mean, no one speaks with more authority on this topic than he does. I mean, imagine this ridiculous comic, Dave Smith, trying to debate Mossad. I mean, he will never debate. I mean, it would be so ridiculous. He just would shrink down to this little pale nothing in the face of Mossad, who knows and speaks with such authority. So he says, if it was up to me, open the border. I don't want to see Gaza anymore. I don't want Gaza. I want Gaza to cease to exist. And in fact, he is saying this. He was a child who grew up in Gaza, who grew up there, a son of one of the founders of Hamas. He knows the suffering of the children. He really actually does care about the children. He wants to see this end, this victimization also of the people of Gaza, because they're not free. They are kept in that prison, not by Israel, but by the forces of the nations, of the surrounding nations, by Hamas, who want to keep them there for their own political purposes. Because Gaza is a giant refugee camp. The only refugee camp in the world that has lasted for 70 years. The idea of a refugee camp is that the people should assimilate. That the refugee camp should go away. It should not grow and grow and grow. Millions of people. It should have been demolished, he says, 70 years ago. But the United Nations kept promising the people, you will return one day. And they kept striving and struggling and dying, all for a lie, because there was never any intention for the surrounding Arab nations for this to happen. Sure, they would have been glad, the surrounding nations, if Hamas and the Palestinians had destroyed Israel. They would not have complained about that. That's what they have been trying to do since 1948. And despite whatever these surrounding Arab nations say on the surface, if they had thought they had one chance to do it, they would not stop, not think a second before destroying Israel themselves. So, and I think that Israel would have to be a fool to think otherwise. They would have to be a fool to think otherwise than that they cannot trust any of those surrounding Arab nations. I mean, it's like, your abuser who every time says, oh, come on, it's over now. I'm not going to do it again. And they do it again, And so eventually you have to stand up to your abuser and you have to do whatever it takes to make them stop. After 1967 war, when the Arab countries united and tried to annihilate the state of Israel, Israel was extremely outnumbered in that war. And the surprise was that Israel had the victory over all of those nations. And ever since then, these Arab nations have been blindsided by that. Especially, I know because I was living in Egypt. To this day, they do not admit that they were defeated. They will not admit defeat. And they kept saying, we will try again, we will try again, we will try again. And they kept trying until today. And each time they go to war, they lose. They keep insisting. So every time that these Arab nations or Hamas or whatever has gone to war with Israel, they've lost. And they still insist that they write the rules. But it's the one who wins the war. Every war, it's the one who wins, right? Who writes the rules. After World War II, the great powers divided up land. And Germany didn't say, hey, wait a minute. Here are our conditions and you better abide by our conditions. No, they were defeated. They accepted their defeat. So each time Israel defeats its enemies, it has capitulated to their demands. This is the problem. And again, I had listened to Massad's talk that he gave or interview, and this is basically his conclusion, which I agree with. So I'm just talking about what he said as someone who knows better than anyone else. And so Israel has capitulated to the United Nations, to the rest of the world, and who cannot stand to see Israel be victorious. They just don't want Israel to win. So once again, Israel now finds itself in this same situation. Not only must the cult of Hamas die, but the Palestinian lie must die. The state of Palestine must die. Hamas, and make no mistake, the people of Gaza, started a war with Israel on October 7th, and Israel won. Israel won that war. So the future of Gaza is in the hands of the victor, not Hamas. And still, Hamas and the inhabitants of Gaza refuse to admit their defeat. They refuse to return the remaining hostages. And the world gets angry at Israel for that. I know, you don't hear anger from all these influencers demanding that Hamas give up the hostages. It seems so simple, right? So obvious. So the fate of Gaza, as Mossad would say, is in the hands of Israel the victor. And it is Israel, not the United Nations. It isn't France. It isn't the United States. It isn't anyone else with all of their opinions. It is Israel who fought another war at great cost and won again. So if Israel determines that there is no more Gaza, as an outcome of this defeat, then there is no more Gaza because this has to end. I think after October 7th, it has to end. So how dare anyone from any nation on earth that has, remember, has done the same, blame Israel when it has been repeatedly attacked, has repeatedly made peace with its enemies, and now Israel must do what every other nation would do under the same circumstances: destroy its enemy completely. And the lie of Palestine forever. All right. That's quite, I know that that might be a little controversial for all of you. Let me know what you think of this. What other solution is there? I think for the sake of the children of Gaza, this must end. This whole lie that they have been forced into. I mean, it would probably take a couple generations to get over it, to get over this lie. But that is the only way to end this. It doesn't mean it's going to end all terrorism everywhere. No, certainly not. There will always be terrorism because there will always be that hatred for Israel. There will always be that hatred for Jews, and I talked about that elsewhere from a biblical perspective, from a spiritual perspective, because for me that is the only way that you can really explain this hatred towards Jews. And I go into that in another talk. And now a hatred also towards and a demonization going on towards Christian Zionism, which I can get into talking about as well. Anyway, that's the end of this Monday discourse. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much again for being here. God bless you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful coming week. Thank you.